Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review God's Country by Chad Pyle. Chad Pyle is a quite new, promising up-and-coming name from Oklahoma City, and this is their debut album, which was quite anticipated over the release of a couple of EPs that gained quite a bit of an attention a few years back. So this debut album over here is definitely one of the most talked about releases when it comes to rock and metal music. It is also released on FLENSER Records, which I'd say is a pretty cool label, having some pretty interesting stuff when it comes to the rock and metal material. So I got into this album not necessarily knowing what to expect, but I decided to give it a shot. And I'd say that for what it certainly delivers. It is a pretty powerful and pretty noisy and brutal album, and it has many aspects that I can see why people would find them to be quite intriguing and why this album is talked about so much. I believe that this is a pretty decent album when it comes to its overall sound, managing to be quite fierce and quite brutal. I wouldn't necessarily say that I love the production out of this album, but I believe that it gets the job done with its more fierce and aggressive elements being executed quite nicely and having a big punch to it. What I would say though it's the most standout thing about this whole project has to be the vocals, which are really expressive, really powerful, emotional, and in many cases you have those really intense screams that are really passionate, and a big part to it has to do with the lyrical themes as well, as it's this really solid social commentary touching upon many different subjects. It is a pretty nihilistic project with some quite brutal depictions at times. It can get really expressive, it can get quite detailed, and there is the sense of something harsh due to its depictions of climate change, the abhorrent practices due to the system of capitalism. It touches upon subjects like homelessness, murder, suicide, and all of this make for a quite powerful release that in my opinion manages to be pretty intriguing in those aspects. Musically, I wouldn't really say that it's that much of a fascinating release for me, especially when it comes to some of its main ideas having a lot of elements of like sludge metal, which after a certain point, while I can appreciate some of the directions that it takes, it can become quite boring after a while. Though for me this album is certainly at its best when it has this much more of a focus into the noisy rock elements, which in this case I believe that they're pretty solid and they're executed pretty nicely over here. It is an album that definitely succeeds on being heavy and having some quite brutal elements to it. However, for me some of its greatest aspects come when we have those more melodic elements, which is something that I would say is the case with the very first track, Slaughterhouse. I feel that the more melodic riffs are what really steal the show out of this particular track. It gives this more dreadful and devastating sense to it, and it ties nicely with the overall rest of the instrumentation and also with the really expressive and powerful vocals. I would say that another track that succeeds on this approach is the track Anywhere, which for me has definitely the most infectious and the most intriguing chorus out of this whole project. I believe that it's somewhat catchy and the overall idea behind it is nicely executed, and I like the overall pacing, which is something that I was kinda worried due to the more sludge metal elements, but I found a nice balance throughout most of the tracks when it comes to their pacing. Now the track Y was a bit of a grower on me, as I ended up finding the lyrical themes over here to be quite fascinating, with the brutal depictions in regards of homelessness. It is a really expressive and really powerful song, and even if it's not one of the most melodic elements, I do like how heavy and dark this track sounds. The track Pamela, while it's one of those tracks that has some of the most clean elements out of the whole project, and also being one of the most melodic tracks throughout this whole project, I didn't find the overall ideas throughout this track to be all that much compelling. The track Wicked Puppet Dance picks up the pace a little bit, being a bit of a more fast and furious track that goes closer to some elements of like post-hardcore, which is something that we also see with the track The Mask. They do get the job done for the approach they take and what they're trying to provide. The track I Don't Care If I Burn is easily the most forgettable moment over here, as it's basically an interlude, and there's obviously nothing wrong with interludes, but I don't really believe that this one provides all that much to the album. It is lackluster, there's not that much going on to it. It's more like spoken word with very few going on in terms of instrumentation, and I don't believe that there's something really all that special with this song. Finally, there's the lengthy 9-minute finisher, Grim and Smoking Weed.jpg, which despite its silly and goofy title, this is possibly the most serious and the most devastating track out of this whole project. It starts in a pretty standard tone, going into similar approaches with basically anything else that we've heard out of the album so far, but when it comes to the second second half is where we get a bit of a more different approach and where we get definitely the most passionate and the most horrifying vocals out of this whole project. The passion and the sheer intensity out of those vocals is certainly one that feels quite concerning. It deals with suicide and imaginary people inside your head, and for almost half of the song we get this really slow and devastating moments with mostly guitar feedbacks, a really slow tempo, and just those fierce, brutal and intense vocals which feel like torture after a while because this goes on for quite a while. While I do enjoy how this manages to be the most powerful moment out of this album, especially when it comes to the vocal deliveries, I don't really find it a great song in terms of pacing. It is really slow and it takes a while to really reach that point because the first half is mostly standard stuff and there's not really something that much special about it. With that being said, I find that this album is certainly fascinating in some aspects. I wouldn't see myself returning that much into this album, but I can certainly see the hype and I definitely found quite a few elements that would make this release really solid. I believe that this is a pretty good project if you're looking for like noise rock and sludge metal stuff. This one gets the job done with some solid performances, solid deliveries, and definitely one of the most intriguing metal and rock records out of this year. I'm gonna give God's Country a 7- out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why? And what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.